there we go. We're all set up. Ooh. Can you see the presentation as a presentation?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I can't see anybody. I just have 3 screens of the PowerPoint. So
You're not in presentation mode, if that's what you're asking.
So you can only see the main slide, right?
No, you're in edit mode.
Shoot, that's not what I want. Let's try this again. How about now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So, hi everybody. I am Emma and I am the Cater Hall Director. And we also have Amanda with us, and I'm going to let her do a brief introduction.
Hey everybody, my name is Amanda Ryle and I work as a senior career coach at the NDSU Career and Advising Center. You might be a little curious as to why I'm here. Hopefully that'll become even more clear as we go through the rest of the presentation. But ResLife has so graciously welcomed us in today too, to talk alongside Emma here to chat about some best practices for your upcoming interview, but then for interviews thereafter, once you're out in the professional working world after graduation as well.
Yeah, so you want to be an RA again, and we want to work with you to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward during both the application and the interview process. So as you know, there are some changes that we are putting in the process this year. So it's for you and your professional development. As Amanda said, we want to make sure that you are really putting your best foot forward and doing the best job that you can. So we want to help you reflect on and articulate your experience. So in years past, we've seen some RAs who are returners coming into this interview process, and they don't necessarily really reflect and say exactly what they experienced, what they're hoping to get for by coming back to the position. And so we really want to make sure that you are able to do that during both the application and the interview process. We want you to reflect and know what you've learned, what you want to continue to do in the position, why you want to continue in the position. So important things for us to know while we're doing placement and selection and things like that. We also want to help you build better interview skills overall. As Amanda said, this is something that's going to be beneficial for you, not just now, but also in your future when you move into the formal workforce and when you're doing interviews in the future for your career option, right? And then we also want you to, again, apply this to your job after graduation. So not only is this super helpful for that interview process, there's skills that you have that you get from being an RA that you can then use in a job after graduation. So we really want you to help kind of understand those and build yourself and make yourself more marketable for your future. It also, as I said, helps us as hall directors get better information about you and potential hall placement. So it helps us really make sure that we're getting the information that we need so that we can build the strongest teams possible for the halls and the student populations that we have, right? So it's a whole ecosystem, and we want to make sure that we are working together to get you where you should be, as well as to make sure that you are growing and developing in this area. So who can apply? There's always the weird question of like, I'm kind of a returner, I'm a mid-year hire, things like that. So if you were here during fall RA training, you should apply as a returning RA. So you saw me, you saw the different tutus that I wore, that means that you should apply as a returning RA. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say tutus, because you were not at fall RA training, that's totally fine. We would have you apply as a new RA, but however, this information in this presentation is still helpful. So like you don't have to hop out of here and say peace out, because the things that we're going to be sharing today could also be helpful for you as you go through the interview and application process. Okay, so the timeline for you all. So applications are currently open. They opened on December 1st and they will stay open through January 4th. We recognize that that's over winter break and some of you all are going to be at home and say, I don't want to think about school. I get that. I'm also going to be home not wanting to think about school and work, but we're going to send a lot of follow-up emails and reminders to make sure that you submit your applications on time. So if you know who you are as a person and you're like, I'm not going to look, I'm not going to remember it, maybe you want to take some time now to make sure that everything is set up for that. And then you just kind of go through, do a quick spot check while you're on winter break, and then you submit it. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind. But again, we will be sending out those reminders for you. Also, when you submit your application, as you have in the pact, you will pick your interview slot. So interviews are scheduled for January 19th through February 1st. So you really have the option to make sure that you're picking the slot that fits best with your schedule. So if you have a bunch of classes in the morning, maybe you want to interview in the afternoon, or if you have all of your classes in the afternoon, you want to start early in the morning and make sure that you get that interview in and off your plate before you have to go to class. And then all of you, unless your eval is today, should have already had your performance evaluations with your hall director, because those will be completed by tomorrow, and we'll be using those to determine who does get an interview. So we are no longer asking for resumes and cover letters. So you're really just filling out those application questions that are in the eResLife application. So that's really, that plus your eval is your one chance to tell the hall directors why you should come back as an RA and why you should be given an interview. So make sure that you're not, just throwing in a real short answer with that question. You really want to take some time and think about it and make sure that you're telling us what we're asking for. So here are some things that you should think about while you're working on those application questions. So what's your motivation to continue being an RA? Really, what is it? There's so many different reasons that you could want to continue to be an RA. Your reason isn't necessarily your neighbor's reason, and so we want to know what your motivation is to continue in this role. We also want to know how you're creating a safe community. So you remember that acronym that we taught you all at RA training? We want to know how you're creating a sense of belonging for your residents. We want to know what you're doing to help your residents feel like they are affirmed and valued in your community. What are you doing to reinforce to all of your residents that they have the freedom to be whoever they are and be themselves authentically in those spaces that you're creating for them? And how are you promoting education and growth, not only for your residents, but for yourself and the rest of your staff? So really think about those things, even now, without the application questions in front of you. Think about these things and make sure that you have those ideas in your head, and then you can kind of move on to the application questions and see how those thoughts that you've already come up with fit into those application questions so that you can really tell us what's your motivation, how are you creating a safe community, right? We also want you to brag about yourself. My number one skill when I was an RA was my billboards. My billboards were out of this park. They were great, right? But I'm also one of those people that when somebody tells me something about myself, I don't like compliments. They make me uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. I also don't like bragging about myself, which you probably can't tell based on what I just said when I was bragging about myself. But it was a skill that I had to learn, because when you interview, you kind of have to brag about yourself a little bit. Not so much that you come off as pretentious and the best person ever, but so that you come off and you can really tell them what skills you have and where you really excel in the position. We also want to know what areas of the job you're still working on or where you want to improve in some areas. So those evaluations that we did, those are really helpful because you can kind of take some feedback from your hall director, your coworkers, your residents, and kind of think about areas that they mentioned that you could really grow and improve in. And then how are you going to do that? How are you going to grow in the areas that we said, maybe this is an area that you can work on? So how can you brag about yourself, also tell us areas that you need to grow, and get that communicated in your application and your interview? So how do you write about the stuff that we just chatted about? So like I said, take that time to reflect. Don't get the application questions out. Just think of those ideas. Think about what you want to tell us, and then also write about your experience. I don't care what RA Joe Schmo did in Stockbridge when I'm talking to you, an RA in Churchill. It doesn't matter what they did. It matters what you did. What is your experience? Have you not had a duty call? You can say, I haven't, addressed a policy violation yet. However, I've read through the conduct code. I, review the IR writing presentations, because I know that this isn't something that I've done yet, but I want to make sure that when that opportunity comes, I'm going to do it correctly. So I want to know about your experience. I don't need you to tell me about the time that Susie addressed a policy violation just because you haven't addressed one. We also don't want you to use concrete and specific examples. So if you can tell me a story about a time that you addressed a bomb policy violation, you did everything right, you wrote the perfect IR, I want to know about that instead of just saying, I am experienced in. Cool, so am I, but what did you do? Tell me that story, give me those examples. And then also details. Again, the short answers don't tell us a story. So we don't want those short answers in that application. We want the story. We want the details. We want to know what you did, what happened, how it resolved, everything. So I have a couple examples for you. So why do you want to continue in the RA position? I want to meet more people and continue to make an impact on the floor and the community, both in the hall and on campus. Cool, but it tells me nothing. So this is a common question and then answer that we get from RAs. And it's really sad to hear this answer over and over and over and over again during interviews. Because the thing is, yeah, cool, that's great, but I can't tell you apart from Joe in Churchill, apart from Susie in Stockbridge. Yeah, sure, Susie can live in Stockbridge. I can't tell the difference between you all because you actually haven't told me anything about your experience. So why do you want to continue in the RA position? I feel that I still have passion to give when it comes to helping make the residence halls feel like home. I remember helping one of my residents, Sam, learn about and join a student organization. See, we're getting into that story. We're getting that concrete and specific example. Sam was really shy before we talked, but has been active within the community and spends a lot of time with their neighbors since they came out of their shell. I know I've done this for other residents and I want to continue to do it for more students next year. I know I became an RA so I could do this, but I did not quite have the same experience as a first-year student. So if I can continue to be present, that means that there are fewer residents that will feel disconnected or lonely here. So this is what we want. You gave us a story. You told us areas where you really want to stay in this position and what you want to do with that. Does that make sense? I'm assuming you all are nodding your head because again, I can't see you. Okay, so the interviews again are going to look a lot like last year or the year before, depending on when you interviewed. So we want you to dress your best. So again, as you've seen, some people come dressed to the nines because they feel the most confident in their three-piece suit, and that's totally cool if that's you. If you're like, nah, that's not my vibe. I like nice jeans and a t-shirt or nice jeans and a button-up. That is also totally okay. We want you to wear what you feel most professional in. So also, the process is going to be the same as years previous, so you will meet all of the hall directors. There will be 6 interview tables, and at each table you will be asked 2 interview questions. The small change from last year is that if you do not feel comfortable interviewing in person, there is the option to sign up for a Zoom interview. And then also, if for some reason you end up in quarantine when you're supposed to be interviewing in person, you can definitely let us know, and we'll be able to reschedule that for you so that you can do a Zoom interview. We also will not be in the union this year, and instead will be in Niskanen expansion. So a couple of changes, but all of that information will be again communicated to you. So no worries about that.
All right, and with that, I think it's my turn, right, Emma?
Yep.
All right, fabulous. I guess before I take over and start talking about more of the interview logistical general stuff, do you all have anything that's pertinent or specific to your RA interview that you want to ask Emma? Otherwise, if it comes up, I'm a pretty informal presenter, at least can be, so feel free to blurt out questions or raise a hand or whatever works for you. But now to get into a little bit of the professionalism. So the last time I chatted with this group or the other RA group, I'd asked the question, what is on time? So would anybody care to share what their family's version was, or whoever they grew up with, what their version was of on time? Were you early? Were you just on time? Were you late?
I had a high school teacher that would say, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, don't show up.
Yeah, that's one we hear every once in a while. Yep. Anybody else have a different definition of on time?
Ours was always just so long as you're 5 minutes early, you're doing okay.
If you're 5 minutes early, you're on time, or you're close enough. For my family growing up, if we made it into church like 5 to 10 minutes after it started, the Zen-Zens were in good shape. We made it and we were crushing it. So I share that though to say, like, everybody has their definition or their different understanding of what on time is, right? But when it comes to being timely and professionally prepared for an interview, we say 10 to 15 minutes early is on time. That gives you enough time to kind of get your bearings of the surroundings, to make sure you've entered the right door, made it to the right floor. I don't know, however, how many of you have ever been to Niskanen before, but if you haven't or you're not familiar with the bus route to get there, or however it is you plan to get there, plan that stuff out ahead of time. I mean, I've met with people before who said that they ended up being a half hour late for interviews because they went to the wrong building or they totally got lost in their way there. So try and be as prepared ahead of time to make sure you're on time, which again is that maybe 10 to 15 minutes early. I don't want to talk about attire too much because Emma covered it pretty well for the interview you all will be having as returning RAs. But one thing I would note is that for kind of general basics or tips and suggestions that we provide on preparation attire-wise, we say dressing one step up from what the day-to-day requirements on the job would be. So if you're applying with a company who they typically wear like a polo and jeans, maybe it's a nice pair of pants and a button up. Or if they wear, I don't know, business casual every single day and it is already like nice slacks and a button up, maybe you do put on a three-piece suit or something kind of one level up from what the day-to-day requirement is. I'll also use this time just to kind of insert a service that we have at the Career and Advising Center too, for those who aren't familiar with the Career Closet. So whether it's for this interview as an RA, a presentation you have coming up, we had a couple of fellows drop by one time because they were going to a wedding and wanted to look fly, whatever, we don't care. But it's a space for you all to just come in and check out clothing that we have that's stored on campus. So we're located in Ceres Hall, same building as Registration and Records Counseling Center, for those of you who aren't familiar. And we have an office that's designated to all sorts of different attire items that you might need for an interview. So it's free to check it out, and we ask you bring it back in 2 weeks. Not too bad of a deal. In addition to professionalism, we talk a lot with students about doing that research ahead of time. So I already talked about preparing and researching the location or how you might get there, the bus route, that kind of thing. But this might also be different specifics about the company. So you all are fortunate enough to have worked for ResLife, for NDSU, for specific halls previously. So you have some of that insider knowledge and perspective, but should it be another interview for another company down the road, it's helpful to know what is their mission statement? How do they give back to the community? What do they like to post and brag about? Emma talked about you all bragging about yourselves. Employers do that too. And they like to do that on social media. They like to do that on their LinkedIn, their Facebook page, their company Instagram, because that's where they get to show the fun stuff that they do with their employees and the stuff that really engages people around them. So those are great places to look to be able to answer that why question, which I know Emma already brought up in terms of your application materials, but employers want to know why you, and they want to know why is this position in this company a good fit for you, your goals, your passion, your values. They want to know that stuff. So doing this research about the company ahead of time is a great way to be able to answer those questions really confidently and fluidly during an interview. All right, and then as Emma also shared, you all may have either an opportunity or an obligation, I don't really know how to phrase it for this ResLife interview where it may be virtual. But what we do know too about just employers in general across industries, these virtual or Zoom interviews are becoming a lot more common. Various reasons for that. A, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than if they had to pay for meals, for commutes, those kinds of things for applicants. It's also a lot more efficient. They can fit a lot more interviewees in a time slot. If a Zoom call can end at one time or start and end at certain times, then they can fit in more candidates. And it's convenient for people who are across different locations. And then of course, in the day and age of COVID, it's there again, kind of an obligation. It's pretty much the only method of interviewing some companies have. So as much as some of us are really getting sick of Zoom and sick of these kind of engagements in this way, they are not going to go away. So being kind of prepared for these interview styles ahead of time can be great. So some of the key things that we talk about when it comes to these Zoom or virtual interviews is appearing engaged. Now, I don't know about you all, but I have a couple of screens here. I shut off my other screen just for the sake of the presentation because sometimes I'm looking back and forth between the screen and the people, or the presentation and the people, and that can be kind of distracting, or it maybe looks like I'm not actually engaging with my audience in front of me. I've also shared with some people that there are some students, my camera's up here now, so I feel like I'm looking right at it, but I can't see you. So that's why my gaze is still bopping around. But some students have cameras located in really bizarre locations, like down here in the bottom part of the screen. So it looks like they're totally not paying any attention or looking at notes. And in those situations, I would even just say it's better to address that with the employer ahead of time to say, hey, I apologize if it doesn't look like I'm looking directly at you, but my camera is kind of in an odd location on this laptop. So that's why I'm looking down a lot or something. So better to address it than not at all. You also want to show enthusiasm. I've worked with people before as far as students, as well as for people who have interviewed for positions in our office before, who have had a really hard time having the words that they say match the enthusiasm in their voice and in their facial expression. Sometimes I'm over animated, so there's also a fine balance, especially in Zoom time. I feel the need to really non-verbally agree with people when my mute is on, but that's a personal problem. So when it comes to enthusiasm though, and one of the things I was mentioning about having your tone match your facial expression, there was once a woman who interviewed with our office, and when asked why she wanted the position, she said, "You'll never find anyone more passionate or excited about this work." And her face did that. And if I was going to meet someone who was never going to be more excited than her, I would have expected a little bit more inflection, maybe a smile, I don't know. So you really want it to match, otherwise you're memorable for the employer for the wrong reasons. Being careful of that. Pace, whether it's an in-person interview or a virtual one, it's important to be conscientious of your space or your pace, excuse me. I tend to speak quicker when I'm excited, clearly. But then you also just have to be really conscientious of if you have a lag in your dialogue. So even just trying to address that with the employer early to say, I think there's a bit of a lag, so please let me know if my answer gets cut off or anything comes across unclear, because you don't want there to be too much of a lag where you're kind of starting to overlap the communication. So just kind of drawing attention to those things is really important. And this goes along with what I'm going to say here at the end too about communicating with an employer early and often, that these systems, they're new for us, I think. Some employers are maybe more familiar with it or more accustomed to it. But for the most part, we were all forced into this virtual world like that. That same thing is true for employers. So they understand that technical difficulties happen. They understand that sometimes they send you a link for the meeting and they forgot to send you the password. So sometimes those kinds of things are on them too. So as long as you're doing that communicating early and often about, I'm having a hard time getting connected, the link doesn't seem to be working, or again, I've got this lag with my technology, so please excuse me if you miss a response or something of that nature. So be communicative. They appreciate that a lot. And that's a great way to sell a good skill of yours during an interview, because a lot of times employers care about employees who can communicate. It's weird, right? Along with testing your technology, being aware of your background. Before I opened up this call, I had to go and make sure I changed my background because we did a Christmas party with our student staff, or a holiday party with our student staff, and I had a whole theme thing. Also, if you hear jingling, I'm actually still wearing the Christmas sweater, so I apologize. So just kind of being aware of what's behind you. If you use a virtual background, great. Otherwise, if it's too distracting, just make sure you have nothing too distracting on the wall behind you. Or one day I accidentally left my ceiling fan on so you could see the shadows of the ceiling fan blades. So being aware of some of those things prior to the start of an interview or a start of a call with really anyone is really important. Want to make sure you have that secure connection, even if there is a lag, just make sure it's secure and semi-reliable at least. And then especially for interviews, you want to have a quiet location where you'll be undisturbed. For those of us who are forced into working from home, we can't always control, I should say, who is around us or maybe what, and I'm not picking on anybody here, but I saw a kitty cat in there earlier. That's great for these kinds of things. Maybe for an interview, you won't want the cat there. So just either making arrangements for someone to watch a pet, or even just telling roommates like, hey, from this time to this time, I'm in an interview. Can you really just kind of make yourself scarce? If it's a nice day, go for a long walk, something like that. So again, with the communication, very helpful. But I've talked a lot. So does anybody have any questions on that stuff yet? All right. The next piece here then is about behavioral-based interviewing. So what we know about employer hiring trends is that they're going to a lot more of these what are called behavioral-based interviews, where they essentially ask you, tell me about a time when you did this, or explain a situation, excuse me, where you encountered conflict in the workplace, or when you had to work as part of a team, when you had to collaborate, et cetera, et cetera. So what the employers are looking for is actually just like Emma was saying about your application written responses, not to give anything too vague or too empty, two-dimensional. There are a few different parts to the answer where you explain the situation you were in, the task that was at hand, the action you took, and the result or the outcome. So instead of saying, oh yeah, I've collaborated before, you would say, well, when I was a part of XYZ initiative, I actually collaborated with ResLife and the admissions office, and what we were tasked with doing was XYZ. Here is what I did, the action that I took, because back to what Emma said earlier, employers don't really care what, I think it was John and Susie we were talking about earlier, what John and Susie's involvement was with the task or with the initiative. They want to know what you did. And then also sharing the result. Did you have success? Did you learn from the failure, from the conflict, from whatever the situation was? And again, just like Emma said again, it's an opportunity to brag. You don't want to come off as too boastful, but I will tell you, I've only had in the 3+ years I've worked here, 2 students that I've had to say, you're coming off as overconfident, but probably well over 100 who I've had to say, you're not confident enough, let's work on that. All right, and now I think there was going to be an opportunity to do some breakout rooms and practice some of these responses. You still want to do that, Emma?
Yeah, I think so. Because again, the reason that we changed this process is because in years past, we've gotten good, okay answers from our RAs, but we want to get great answers from you. So we really know why you want to come, what you want to do, what you're going to grow in. And so we want to give you some time to practice that. So we're going to do what is something that you are most proud of in your time as a resident assistant. So kind of think about that while I set up these breakout rooms. We're going to have 2 people in each room. That way each of you can have a chance to be the interviewer and the interviewee. Okay?
And while Emma sets that up, does anyone have any questions on those elements of the STAR method? Situation, task, action, or result?
I was wondering, so when they ask, should you make sure to only give one example?
That's a great question, Anne. I would say you don't necessarily need to just give one, especially if it's like one of those questions that maybe is a couple of parts. So tell us about a time in which you experienced conflict in a team or something like that, and the only conflict you can think of is between you and one person. Then maybe you give that example, but then also situations you've maybe encountered in a team before. So it really kind of depends on what your answer is bringing forth. Ideally, your one answer would provide enough content, but we know that that's also not always the case when you haven't had years of experience in certain areas that they're maybe asking questions about too. Yeah. And Taylor, I think I saw you unmuted as well. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we were going to be able to see this screen while we were in our breakout rooms.
No, but I will be able to send the question to the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma.
Yeah. So there is going to be one group of 3, and Amanda, you're going to be invited to a room. You don't have to go into it. So, okay.
I am also happy to pop into them too at some point if you think it's helpful. Otherwise, if this is kind of a they do and then provide feedback, that's okay too. But
Yeah, I think we're gonna have them share some answers in the next round and then kind of talk about it. Five minutes is enough, right?
I think so.
Okay, that's what the rooms are set for right now.
I think it'll give them each a chance to practice a response and hopefully give each other feedback too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to step away to grab a little more water. I have a bit of a tickle. I'll be right back.
looks like we have one more group that's on their way back. Awesome. Is anybody willing to share what they shared as their answer? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, maybe?
I guess I can.
Thank you, Anne.
I said that I was proud of the feedback I had gotten from my staff and residents, kind of indirectly through my hall director, like in my evaluation. He told me that I was a positive person in these people's lives and that they enjoyed seeing me and they enjoyed being around me, and that I was able to kind of brighten their day and connect emotionally, even if I didn't necessarily have deep emotional connections with all of them. They felt that I was there for them and that I was willing to talk, even if they didn't take advantage of it. And I really appreciated that. So.
Thanks for sharing. Anybody else willing to share?
I can share. Okay, so I came into PAVIC during like mid-year around October, and because my residents already had an RA before, they didn't really know who I was, and they already had connections with their other RA, so it was really hard to like break through. And also it was just hard to see them because of COVID and just how there's not really a lot of activities that you see your residents going to and connecting with them in that way. So in the beginning, I really struggled with like how to connect with them and just stuff like that. But I was really proud of me not giving up and just like really keep trying. And I talked a lot to other RAs in my building and in other buildings to just talk about like how they like connected with their residents, especially since I didn't go through the full training before school. So I talked with them and I really took advantage of the ICs, and I was like, I'm going to take this to my advantage and get to know you guys and do the ICs in person to like force a connection kind of. And so by doing that, it really helped like the connection. And now I know a lot more of my residents because of doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So that honestly is a really great question to keep in mind and to think of while you're doing that reflection process before you do the applications. So, and remember the STAR method. I will be sending out a leaflet after the meeting with the STAR method so that you can really focus on that while you're prepping for your application interview.
All right, then just a little bit more on the prep work side of things for any upcoming interview. Some of the common questions that you can anticipate, or some variety or version of these that are commonly asked, would be around the strengths or weaknesses or areas that you could improve. It's really helpful, just like Emma said, to reflect on, yes, the experiences you've had as an RA, but what strengths do you bring to the table that are relevant? Is it that you are able to effectively communicate and that you are able to create that positive environment like Anne listed? Or is it like Bryn had said, that you have persistence and a drive to learn and continuously improve and that you seek out more information? So call to mind what those strengths are and how you're going to be able to relate them to the RA position or other positions and companies in the future. And then also those weaknesses questions. Those are not fun to answer, but they come up a lot. So some of the basics on how we talk to people about answering those is to essentially give the employer or the listener or whatever the situation is a reason why they don't have to worry about your weakness. So for an example, I take on way more than I should, and I'm a yes person and I don't say no enough. So yes, it sounds nice and flowery to be helpful and to be collaborative, but I do it to a flaw where it maybe is a reason that I miss on other deadlines or my own to-dos. So the way I would talk through that with an employer is to say, an area that I know that I could improve is by starting to say no to things that aren't quite as essential, or make sure I'm prioritizing my own tasks before taking on some for others. So a way that I've been working through that already is by doing XYZ. So you're telling them they don't have to fix it about you, but you're working on it for yourself. Why do you want to return? I know Emma has already talked about that quite a bit in the written response, but that's also helpful to call to mind how you're going to answer that for an in-person. And then what skills do you need to be effective as an RA? These are great things just to kind of think about, call to mind, reflect on your experience, to say, okay, what were the skills that I brought to the table that helped me to be successful in certain situations, or to be more helpful throughout training to make sure that I retained the information, whatever it might be. So that's a little bit more of that prep work that can go into interview planning ahead of time. And then a little bit more on calling to mind your previous RA experiences. Again, these aren't things you necessarily need to answer right now, but just good things to think about as you're going into this experience. So what skills were used, like I already mentioned on the previous slide, or what experiences really stood out? Was there something that you did get feedback on from the hall director or even from one of your residents about something that went really well or something that didn't go well? Either way, what did you learn from it? What are some ways that you feel you could positively impact the program or the residents? So just like Emma had said, yeah, it's really flowery and nice for people to hear, well, I want to work with residents and I want to make a nice place for them to live. Fantastic. But what's the rest of the, what I call the meat and the potatoes to your answer? That bare bones answer is like a side salad, and the really detailed information, that's the meat and the potatoes that really fill you up. So calling to kind of bringing up some of those different situations and knowing how you'll talk about them ahead of time will again make them come out that much more smoothly and confidently. What's the why? Just to rehash out what we mean there is, why do you want to work for NDSU, for Res Life, or as an RA? And then why is this type of a position really good for you? Maybe it truly checks off one of your boxes for your values, or you're really passionate about whatever it is. And so that's what makes it a good fit on that two-way street. Why should Residence Life bring you back? Emma, did you talk about this one earlier, or did I imagine that? Just a little bit. Okay, so just a little bit more on that then is, yes, again, you can say, well, I really enjoyed my job this last semester. Okay, what about it? What was it that you feel like you did really well in an area that you grew and that you would like to continue to grow as a professional, and you'd like to expand your skills and your experiences? What has been the most meaningful experience? I think we touched on that one. And then tell us about an accomplishment you are most proud of. So that kind of blends together that practice one from earlier. So having those things ready and prepared to go can again make things go that much more smoothly for you kind of throughout if you do some of this prep ahead of time.
And keep in mind that you're returners and you're applying to be a returning RA, which means we kind of expect a little bit more from you during that interview process. So yeah, we expect good things from our new RAs as they're applying and interviewing, and we want them to be successful, but you all were successful. You got through, you got hired, you got a position, you are now working as an RA. And so because of that, we expect a little bit more from you during this interview process. If I have a new person who's giving me this answer for this question, cool, awesome, they're doing great. If I have you, a returning RA, giving me that same answer to that same question, there's a little bit of a disconnect there, because again, you've been in this position, which means that you should be able to give me a little bit more in those interview and application questions.
So using the time wisely. So we've already talked about not giving that two-dimensional answer. So make sure you're elaborating enough. You're telling the full story. You're giving enough details to paint the picture of the situation or the workplace or whatever the answer includes. But don't forget the R. And the R stands for what again in that STAR method?
Result.
Megan nailed it. R stands for result. Yes. So we find that when we're doing mock interviews with students, which we do mock interviews with students, so if you ever want to practice one or kind of talk through some of these answers or these questions and how you might answer them, give me a holler. But the most common thing that happens in those mock interviews is that things go really, really well, and they're telling us about how they resolved this huge conflict and they worked really collaboratively with people, and then the answer is over. And then we're sitting there going, but what happened? Did the customer ever come back? Or, you know, were you still friends with that person? You know, we want to know the end of that response. Otherwise, that kind of leaves people with that wiggle room to even make an assumption that maybe things didn't end so well, and that's why you didn't include it. So include the art. And including the details about the situations. That's another thing that I think tends to happen, is that sometimes we assume people will know what we're talking about, or they'll be able to fill in the blanks on their own with the amount of information they give. Pretend if Emma's your hall director right now, pretend you've never met her. Pretend you haven't worked in the same hall for the last year, and don't make the assumption that she's going to know what you're talking about or what you're referring to when you talk about a certain situation with a resident. Paint the picture and use the details. And you also have 7 minutes for 2 questions. I've done mock interviews with people where they had 14 questions and they got done in 7 minutes, which means they barely answered anything at all. And most of the time was me asking them the questions. So you have those 2 questions. You have 3.5 minutes apiece, if my math doesn't mistake me here. So provide the detail, provide the information, and use up as much of that time as you can. Now with that, also don't just sit and ramble. Anybody a fan of The Office? When they ask Michael Scott why he's one of the best directors or why he has the best sales, when he's talking to David Wallace and he just starts an answer and he said, sometimes I don't even know where I'm going, but I just start talking and try to fill it in as I go. Don't do that either. Don't Michael Scott it. Be intentional about what you say, but be thorough and provide the details. And then if you would like a little more guidance, one-on-one assistance, whatever it might be, that's Cassie Gilbert. She's a colleague of mine who also did some of these presentations. But my contact information is there. I would highly encourage you to reach out via email if you have any questions. You can stop by the Career and Advising Center, which is on the 3rd floor of Ceres Hall. Otherwise, if you want Zoom meetings, in person, whatever, we do our best to accommodate.
Any questions?
I have a question. So because I didn't go through training, I will be applying as a new RA. Will the questions that I'll be answering during the interview, will those be like the returning questions that we went over, or will they be the new? Okay.
Yeah, so they will end up being the new RA questions, but you can definitely show off that you are currently in the RA position and use those questions to your benefit to answer about what you have learned. And it kind of gives you a little bit of an edge because we're asking you the new RA questions, but you have some of that experience already under your belt.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if we get a question about resolving conflict, is it okay to talk about a personal relationship instead of a professional?
Yes, if that's your best experience, you absolutely can. Just make sure that you're hitting all of the things that you would want to hit in regards to resolving conflict. Because let's say that your personal conflict is between you and a student that you're doing a class project with, right? Well, then you can relate it to what it would look like if you were having an interpersonal conflict with somebody on your staff. So how do you make sure that you continue to maintain the professionalism and things like that after you have that conflict, and how do you resolve it? Any other questions?
If I might just add on to that too, I know when we talk through those with students as well, and they're like, well, I have an example of something that was between a friend and I, versus maybe it is even not even having something in a classroom or in a workplace. And we'll just tell them to be careful about that, because usually the closer the person is to you, the more heightened emotion there is with it. So sometimes when you have those conversations or you talk through that, it accidentally comes out kind of blamey, like, you know what I mean? Because you have so much emotion behind it, it kind of sounds like you're biased in it, but you want it to be that the employer hears that you can come at it from an unbiased lens, and you can be very intentional about your conflict resolution rather than making it too one-sided. Sorry, go ahead.
Emma, I have a very specific question, so if you wouldn't mind holding on till after. Thank you.
It sounds like there's elephants above me. If there's no more questions right now, you can definitely reach out to myself, your own hall director, Amanda, if you have questions afterwards, and we would be happy to help you with that. One moment.